Yes, we are going to talk to you today about the magic of service patterns. You'll be very pleased to know if you've been to any of the things that I've been talking about service patterns, which is, let's face it, every single day. You'll be very pleased to know that it's not me talking about it today. We have my wonderful colleague Mel, who's going to be talking to you about some of the awesome work that we've been doing at the moment. But to get started, just to quickly say, yeah, we're recording this, so obviously pop your camera off if you want to, or keep it on, up to you. Also, any questions that you've got, pop them in the chat and we'll pick them up probably more towards the end of the session. But obviously if there's anything pressing, just feel free to pop your hand up and just interrupt. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so to start off with then, what we're going to talk about is service patterns. So for anyone who hasn't been in anything before, just to give you a bit of context of what it is, we've been working on service patterns properly since about January. So it came from a discovery into sort of design systems, reusable assets, templates, all things like in that world last year. And last year, service patterns were kind of, although they've been spoken about in different areas and you know, some people have done bits of exploratory work in it, it's still a fairly new kind of emerging area or developing area in different ways. So the way that we started this was by doing a quick 5-day design sprint. So we kind of cleared the decks, as it were, and spent 5 days to just try and get something from sort of concept into having a thing, like having a digital product that we could at least talk about. It was probably wrong, bits of it were right, bits of it were wrong, but it just gave us something to everybody to see and share the same kind of starting point over. You know, it's much easier to have a thing there and tear it apart and work in that way than it is to kind of just have a blank page, we thought. So that's how we started this off. And during that time, we kind of came up with we had some existing knowledge over why something like this would meet user needs. But we also worked with some assumptions like, well, I think that this would be the best course of action. I think people would need this particular aspect of it. And we kind of plugged the gaps with those things. And so what we then did is from about January to June, we kind of worked on the concept testing, like fleshing that out, testing it with lots of different people. So we went and did workshops with several different organizations around Wales, lots of different designers around Wales, people working on the services around Wales, to really try and sort of knead the dough a little bit and see whether it was like something feasible, whether it would work, whether it was needed, whether there was an appetite for something like this, and obviously whether it was trying to find some user needs around it a bit more concrete than what we had. So that's what we spent a lot of that time doing, and that was, as I say, mostly with practitioners. So that went really well. There was a lot of positivity around it. People were able to use it. You know, we learned a lot about the different platforms being used around Wales, with people designing services, building services. So we were plugging a lot of those like knowledge gaps that we had then with fact, which is obviously always a really good thing. So by the time we fleshed that out and co-designed, you know, patterns with a lot of different people, a lot of different practitioners, the next thing to do was to move to testing with end users. So that's to say citizens, people who would use services that these patterns could be helping to build. So that's what Mel's going to talk to you about in a minute. But just to quickly give you maybe an explanation on what we mean by service patterns. So we're talking about clickable journeys to help create services. I'm not sure whether you can see how clear the text is on here, but just to kind of say, we have the way that we're thinking about it is there's like 3 levels. Okay, so you have a journey type. So that's like apply for something, register something, book something, request something, tell something, pay something, and check something. I was doing that without looking then, so hopefully that's right. And then each one of those, I'm trying to test myself. And then each one of those journey types, okay, is made up of different steps. So those steps might be things like asking the user for some details, the user making a confirmation, the user verifying their identity, whatever it might be. But those different steps exist within that journey type. And what we're talking about here with service patterns, at least in our context, is the digital journeys. Okay, so the digital services. So obviously service patterns could definitely, and there's loads of great people doing work around the UK in this area. So there's places like Scottish Government, Ministry of Justice, DWP, DEVRA, And those contexts are slightly different. So you know, like you might be designing service patterns that work across an organization, and you're a little bit more zoomed out than this, and you're perhaps thinking about how different journey types work together to form an end-to-end service. You know, they're all slightly different, but what we're talking about is something that might work for different public services. So we're not talking about specific booking types. We're saying it's a booking journey, and no matter what type of booking journey you are making, this could hopefully provide a common flow for that. Anyway, so those steps, that you put them in the right order, and then those steps might be made up of individual pages or individual screens, or they might be made up of, say, multiple screens. And what we're doing is kind of pointing at a lot of existing content patterns, really great work that already exists out there. So, and we're trying to just put them in a repeatable flow for people to build from. So to give you an example of how that might look, here is a apply for single person discount on council tax. So you can see it's an apply journey. It's made up of an entry step, ask for user details step, and then I won't go into the details of why there's two, but there's two ask for user detail steps. Then you verify their identity, check your answers, make a declaration, confirmation, and then underneath that, each of those steps is made up of individual screens. So that is, hopefully that kind of gives you the gist on what we're talking about when we talk about service patterns. So digital journeys. And what we did is we built a prototype of a kind of library of patterns, and this is what we went and tested in those workshops. So as I said, we did this with a bunch of different organizations. We learned so much awesome stuff. And you know, we were testing the flow of the patterns themselves. They were trying out some service mapping activities and seeing whether they could use the pattern library. So we were learning about the flows themselves. They were making amendments to the flows, which helped us then to do the next iterations of those flows. But we were also testing the usability of like the guidance that maybe we were putting around it, and you know, the usability of the library itself. Did people need examples? All of those things. So they were super interesting workshops, and we learned a lot through them. But as I say, after we tested with practitioners, you know, were we giving the right level of guidance, flows, etc.? The next thing was to go and test whether those worked for end users. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mel to talk about the next bit. You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. As soon as I shared the screen, my Teams disappeared. So yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, thanks, Liam. So yeah, we just heard from Liam that we've done some testing on the booking service patterns with members of the public. And I'm going to talk us through a little bit more about what we did and some of the highlights of what we found as well. And I guess just to kind of put this into context, when people use digital public services today, each one can feel quite different, even if they're doing something really similar. So some examples like booking a collection, reporting an issue, or applying something in that journey that you just saw from Liam. And I guess it's that kind of inconsistency between services that make them harder to use than they need to be. So we asked, like, what would happen if we could make services feel more predictable, more familiar, more consistent? And I guess that's the kind of idea behind service patterns. So if digital public services use the same tried and tested building blocks, they'll feel more familiar, easier to use, and more predictable for the people using them. So in other words, like, people wouldn't have to relearn every service from scratch. They'd recognise or start to recognise that flow in them, and that should help build confidence and make things easier for them to use. So to test that kind of hypothesis, we asked some simple but important questions. So first of all, can people actually complete the tasks that we want them to using services built this way? The second one, did the journeys feel more familiar after using one of them? So moving on to that second journey, is that making things easier for them and easier to do? And then that third one, because we're designing bilingually, how did the Welsh versions work for fluent Welsh speakers and for Welsh learners? And those kind of three main questions guided the prototypes that we created and also the way that we tested them. So we ran some in-depth usability testing remotely. Each session lasted about an hour, where people completed realistic tasks using 3 clickable prototypes built on the booking service pattern. So for the full testing, we spoke to 5 participants who had a range of digital confidence and access needs. We spoke to people who had mental health requirements, mobility, and neurodivergence, and that kind of helped us to see where services worked well and where some barriers appeared as well. We also did more kind of light touch testing at the Eisteddfod, and we spoke to 18 people, mainly Welsh speakers and learners, to understand how clear and natural as well the versions felt. So it's kind of more kind of quick testing that we did there. So we got a bit of depth through that full sort of remote testing, and then the breadth looking at a wider range of voices at the Eisteddfod. So for the testing, we created 3 example services to put in front of people. These were all fake services, and they were all used creating the same sort of booking pattern, or using the same building blocks of that booking pattern. One was for book a bulky waste collection, another was for travel vaccinations, and then that third one for booking a room in a library. So each service looked different. They were provided by different fake organisations, but underneath they all followed a really similar structure, so following that booking pattern. During the testing, we mixed up the order that participants saw the prototype so that we could kind of get a feel and see how people reacted to one service and whether that helped them feel more confident with the next. I think it's worth kind of saying that this wasn't like just traditional usability testing. Normally when you test with end users or with citizens, you look at kind of one service in detail and try and improve on that one service. But here I think the service itself wasn't the only thing that we were testing. What we really wanted to know was, do those patterns work for people? Does having services following that kind of same structure, using those building blocks, make them easier to use? And I guess that meant that we were looking at kind of 2 separate levels. So we have on the right there, the pattern level insight. So that kind of bigger picture, did repeating that same structure build confidence for our users. And then on the left, we've got the more kind of service specific insights. So the more finer details in those specific services. So it could be things like button labels, like the layout on the page, or the clarity of things like help text from the form fields that were in those services. So yeah, kind of having those 2 kind of values from this project, helping us to kind of test and validate our big question: do service patterns really work for people? And secondly, giving us those kind of practical insights to improve those example services we built along the way. So yeah, a little bit unusual, and I think it's safe to say that when working through those, it definitely led to some kind of head-scratching moments during analysis and the reporting, trying to kind of clearly articulate those 2 separate strands and kind of having to come back to those kind of 2 layers to try and do that. So I'm now going to talk through like 3 of the top findings or highlight findings from this research. I'll be focusing more on the pattern level insights just for the purposes of this show and tell. So the first key finding is really encouraging. It shows that service patterns do what they're meant to do. They helped people to feel more confident as they used these services. So when someone had gone through one pattern-based service, the next one felt easier for them to use, and participants felt like they knew what to expect next when going through those different services. So people told us in their own words really that consistency helped them to kind of reduce surprises along the way. So we've got a couple of quotes, and here's how one participant described it. They said, "If online services have similar formats, it makes life a lot easier. And after a while, you know the layout, so it saves time." And I think that really gets to the kind of heart of why service patterns matter. I think it's all about making things easier for people. And I guess like you can kind of think of that as like twofold. So you've got things that are easier for the service, so users of the service, as we can see from this quote here, but also from like an organisational context or from teams who are building those services, as we've seen from some of the previous research that Leah mentioned as well. Got another quote here. They all felt similar. When you fill in one form, the second one isn't a surprise. You're prepared for it. And I think for me, it's that kind of familiarity is what gives people confidence as they're moving through those services. The second key finding was about trust, and this was a bit of a theme through quite a few of our findings, but people told us that they wanted to see kind of key details of services up front. So things like whether the dates of a service were available, or just really understanding what a service is for or what it involves, before they're being asked to hand over any of their personal information. So kind of having that feeling of like, I don't want to give my data too early. I want to know if this service is right for me. I think interestingly, on the first iteration of the booking pattern, when we were testing with organisations, we actually had like ask for user details ahead of the booking details section, but feedback from those kind of workshops showed us that the order didn't feel quite right, so we changed it. So I think, well, definitely now the booking pattern shows those kind of service details first, then ask for personal information. And I think it's really nice that the testing is kind of confirming that the order feels right for people using the service, as well as kind of those building those services as well. So it just, yeah, gives people that kind of sense of control and helps them to build kind of trust in the service that they're using. So yeah, we've got some real great validation that the order of the steps within the booking pattern are kind of meeting those needs. So placing those booking details before personal information in the flow. A couple more quotes here. So this participant said, I don't like council services that ask for too much information or data. I'm wary of what they'll do with it. And I think it's just a really strong reminder of how kind of cautious people can be with those personal details. And we've got a second one here. When looking at the service, said, I think it's the right time to ask for this information once I'd picked a room and time. So thinking about this was for booking a room in a library. And I think it kind of shows like how that sequencing matters and the kind of nuances around getting it right or getting it wrong if you ask for it too early. So yeah, giving people reassurance first, give them the details that they need, and then ask for their data. The third key finding that we had was about support. So at the start of the journey, some people weren't sure what to do if their situation didn't quite fit, and they looked for a really simple way to ask a question. And then at the end, similarly, after completing a booking, they wanted really clear next steps and contact details again in case something changed or they needed to ask a question. So I think, in other words, like people wanted that kind of reassurance that help would be there if they needed it. And I think we know this can feel quite challenging for organisations who may worry that they don't have the resources to kind of handle queries or more queries from their users. But I think the insight's really clear, kind of making that support visible builds that trust with your users. And without it, people may lose confidence or kind of drop out of that process entirely. We've got another quote here. If you had a grey area, there's no way to ask a question. That would be really useful to know. I think it's just a reminder there that like life doesn't always fit neatly into a form that we've created, and people sometimes do need a way to kind of check their own circumstances. So adding contact options and next steps is not just like an add-on, a nice to have, it's kind of part of that building trust for our users. So what I've shared, I guess, is just the highlights. In the full research, we kind of captured a much kind of richer set of insights across every step of the journey. Just to give a couple more examples, so we had some Welsh speakers who told us certain terms didn't translate too well for them, and that the phrasing that we used really mattered. And we also saw like how like really small blockers like button labeling or instructions can kind of shake confidence, even on like some of the familiar tasks that users were going through. So yeah, perhaps something we can go into more detail at a different show and tell, but I just wanted to kind of bring those kind of key findings here. So that means, I guess, at the moment, we're now looking at design iterations and feeding the research findings into the service patterns. And we are looking at that at two levels. So going back to those kind of two things, we're looking at the service specific changes that we can make to those exemplar services, and also about improving that pattern library. I'm just going to hand back to Liam, who's going to share a little bit more about what's next, kind of more broadly for service patterns.
Awesome, diolch, Mel, thank you. Yes, so we are hoping to launch an MVP service pattern library soon, so that's exciting. We feel confident in that booking pattern. You know, we've done lots of testing with practitioners. We've done, you know, really good testing now with citizens with some of those fictional end services that have been designed using those patterns. So yeah, once we've made those iterations, we're feeling confident with that pattern. We've done some testing in those workshops on a couple of other patterns, I think possibly register and request off the top of my head. So hopefully we can now look to continue co-designing and testing some of those patterns, some of the other ones with organizations, build up that research base that underpins all of those things to make sure that they are working and they're in the right order, as it were. And then lastly, we're looking to hopefully do some slightly deeper dive work with a couple of organizations, spend a bit longer, try and work with them, get some of these patterns into their live services and kind of learn from them about how this might work in those particular contexts as well. So yeah, lots of learning still to do, which is always an exciting place to be, but also lots of learning already achieved. So yes, next level unlocked, I think, is probably the best way of thinking about it. Cool. In which case, I think that brings us to the end. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to jump on, let us know, or pop them in the chat. That's also fine. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. Hopefully that was interesting for you. Otherwise, I'll hand over to my colleague, Jem.
Cool, diolch. So we would like some feedback on what you've heard today. So you can either use your phone to scan the QR code to join Menti. Got a couple of very short questions. Basically, we want to know what's your main takeaway from today. So if I share my screen, I'll show you what questions we have. So hopefully you can see that. All good, yeah? So yeah, what's your main takeaway from today? Feel free to pop your comments in. We also would like some feedback or thoughts. What did you think of the service patterns? Maybe would you use it in your own organisation? And then finally, what would you like to see covered at future sessions? So if you can pop on and whiz through those, that would be amazing. But does anyone have any questions? Because obviously we've got another 5 minutes and we'd love to hear some feedback or thoughts.
Also, I'll just add, if you don't have a question now, feel free to email patterns@digitalpublicservices.gov.wales and we will pick that up and email you back.
Oh,
hey, Will.
Hello, sorry, I had to just step out there just for the last couple of minutes, so I might have missed this. But what's kind of the plan for upcoming patterns? Because a project I'm working on now, we're just getting into a pay area, and so it's not something that I've worked on before for a service. So I don't know if you guys are kind of planning on working something similar to that, or we'd be able to look at some of the earlier stuff that you're thinking of just to get an idea.
Pay is a really interesting one because if you think you have those journey types, but then you also have steps. There's probably 2 different types of pay things, because imagine you were use our booking one as an example, right? You're booking a squash court or something. At the end of that single journey, there's a payment bit. There's a payment step in that, right? And there's probably a single screen or 2 screens or something. But then separately, there's a separate pay journey, which is maybe where, let's say it was something I don't know, you've applied for planning permission or something like that, and you've done that part of the journey, and then you go off and go about your life for 2 weeks or whatever it might be, and then the decision comes back and you need to come back and pay. That's its own kind of slightly longer journey, if that makes sense. So pay is a really interesting one. So in one of the workshops that we did earlier in the year, we did work on a basic first version of a pay pattern. There's been no other research done on that particular one, or actually a bunch of them. We're working on one at a time, I guess. But absolutely more than happy to get a meeting with you and go, this is what we got so far. This is sort of designed with a few people, co-designed with a few different organizations. So it's sort of better than not having it, if that makes sense. But
100%, yeah.
So more than happy.
That would be really, really good, actually. Yeah, I might. I'll drop you an email, and maybe myself and my interaction designer and the team can go through that, because there's some nuance to what we're doing. There's going to be some sort of calculator. There's the actual pay element. There'll be nothing like this is often super clear cut, I suppose, but it'll be really, really helpful to hear what you guys have been working on. Cool, thank you.
Definitely. I mean, equally, as with all those workshops we did earlier in the year, it was very much a 2-way conversation in them anyway. It was hopefully there's some learning for like the organization in there, but we were learning so much stuff about all of the organizational context and like how people actually would use these in that particular way. So there's so much that we can learn from those as well. So yeah, that sounds great. Let's sort it out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cheers, man. Cheers, Will.
Have any other thoughts or feedback or questions? Like we said, feel free to email us. We'd love to hear from you if you are interested in working with us or have a specific question for your service. Feel free to email. If there's no other questions, then I'll pause the recording. This will be made available afterwards, so there will be a follow-up email, and we've also got a blog as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But yeah, diolch. Any last words, Liam?
No, just diolch yn fawr. Thank you so much for your interest in service patterns.
Diolch pawb.